In a quiet, unassuming town where life moved at a steady pace, Officer Mark Reynolds was a name people either whispered with caution or avoided altogether. He wasn't just another face in the police department. He was someone who commanded attention for all the wrong reasons. With over 15 years on the force, Mark had built a reputation as a man who played by his own rules. To some, he was a seasoned officer who got results no matter what it took. To others, he was a ticking time bomb, unpredictable, and often unsettling. Mark's personality didn't exactly scream approachable. He carried himself with an air of superiority, his stern expression rarely softening even during casual conversations. His colleagues knew better than to cross him, and civilians often felt uneasy in his presence. But beneath the uniform and badge lay something more troubling, a pattern of behavior that hinted at deeply ingrained biases. Over the years, there had been murmurs about how Mark treated certain individuals differently based on their race. While these whispers never escalated into formal complaints, they lingered like a shadow over his career. One fateful evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Mark found himself patrolling one of the town's more affluent neighborhoods. The streets here were lined with neatly trimmed lawns, expensive cars parked in driveways, and homes that spoke of comfort and privilege. It was a part of town where trouble rarely surfaced, or so everyone thought. As Mark cruised through the area, his attention was drawn to a sleek luxury car gliding smoothly down the road. Something about the vehicle caught his eye, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. The driver, a young man named Daniel Carter, exuded confidence as he navigated the quiet streets. Dressed sharply and driving a car that turned heads, Daniel seemed to belong in this world of wealth and sophistication. What Mark didn't know at first glance was that Daniel was more than just another resident of the neighborhood. He was also the rumored lover of Police Chief Laura Hargrove, a fact that had sparked gossip among the townsfolk, but remained unconfirmed officially. For now, Daniel was simply a motorist going about his evening, until Mark decided otherwise. Officer. The pretense of a routine traffic stop, Mark signaled for Daniel to pull over. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the otherwise peaceful street, drawing curious glances from nearby houses. As Daniel stepped out of his car, calm and composed, Mark approached him with an intensity that bordered on hostility. From the moment their eyes met, there was an undeniable tension in the air. Mark's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, his gaze hardening as recognition dawned on him. He realized who Daniel was, or rather, who Daniel was connected to. What followed was anything but ordinary. Mark began questioning Daniel aggressively, his tone laced with thinly veiled disdain. He scrutinized every detail, from Daniel's license plate to the contents of his car. When nothing incriminating turned up, Mark grew increasingly agitated. Frustrated by the lack of evidence, he resorted to fabricating a reason to detain Daniel. Claiming he'd discovered traces of illegal substances in the vehicle, a claim that held no weight, Mark handcuffed Daniel and placed him under arrest. The entire ordeal unfolded with chilling efficiency, leaving Daniel bewildered and humiliated. But what truly set this incident apart wasn't just the abuse of authority, it was the underlying motive behind it. Mark's actions weren't driven solely by protocol or suspicion. They stemmed from a toxic mix of jealousy and prejudice. Seeing Daniel, a successful, confident black man, as the rumored partner of Chief Hargrove stirred something dark within Mark. Perhaps it was envy over Daniel's apparent success and charm, or maybe it was the simmering resentment toward someone who represented everything Mark subconsciously despised. Whatever the case, this encounter marked the beginning of a twisted game that would spiral far beyond a simple traffic stop. For Daniel, the experience was surreal. One moment, he was enjoying a peaceful drive, and the next, he found himself handcuffed and subjected to baseless accusations. Yet despite the shock and indignation, Daniel refused to let fear consume him. Even as Mark tightened the cuffs around his wrists, Daniel's mind raced with determination. He knew this wasn't just about him. It was about exposing the truth, no matter how daunting the challenge might be. Little did Mark realize that this seemingly insignificant act of cruelty would set off a chain reaction neither of them could have anticipated. After the harrowing ordeal of the traffic stop, Daniel Carter found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. The handcuffs had left faint marks on his wrists, but it was the lingering sense of injustice that weighed heavier on him. Though Mark Reynolds had eventually released him without filing formal charges, the damage had already been done. What should have been a routine evening had turned into a humiliating encounter, one fueled by prejudice and abuse of power. But as Daniel sat in the quiet solitude of his home later that night, he realized this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about standing up against someone who thought they were untouchable. The next day, Daniel received an unexpected call from Officer Mark. At first, the voice on the other end sounded calm, almost casual, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened the night before. But soon the conversation took a sinister turn. Mark began dropping hints, subtle yet unmistakable threats, reminding Daniel of the fabricated allegations from the traffic stop. He insinuated that the evidence he claimed to have found could resurface at any time unless Daniel cooperated. The message was clear: comply or face consequences far worse than embarrassment. Mark's demands weren't overtly specific at first. He hinted at needing financial assistance, suggesting Daniel make a donation to a charity fund Mark conveniently managed. Then came requests for favors, small tasks here and there like running errands or providing information about Chief Hargrove's schedule. Each demand seemed trivial enough on its own, but together, they formed a pattern of manipulation designed to keep Daniel trapped in a web of fear and obligation. Mark made sure to remind Daniel repeatedly that their little secret, the fabricated drug allegation, could easily become public knowledge if he didn't play along. But what Mark failed to account for was Daniel's resilience. Instead of crumbling, under pressure, Daniel decided to fight back, not with anger or impulsiveness, but with meticulous planning. He knew he couldn't take on a seasoned officer alone, especially someone as cunning as Mark. So, he began documenting every interaction between them. Every phone call, text message, and meeting was recorded or written down in painstaking detail. Daniel even started carrying a small digital recorder in his pocket, ensuring he had concrete evidence of Mark's attempts to extort him. As days turned into weeks, Daniel grew more confident in his strategy. He played along cautiously, giving Mark just enough to keep him complacent while secretly building a case against him. During one particularly tense exchange, Mark demanded a significant sum of money, claiming it would ensure Daniel's freedom from further harassment. This time, however, Daniel pushed back slightly, feigning hesitation and asking for proof that the alleged evidence existed. Mark, growing impatient, slipped up by sending a blurry photo of what appeared to be a bag of white powder, a ridiculous fabrication that only strengthened Daniel's resolve. Daniel also reached out to a trusted friend for advice, Elena Martinez, a sharp-witted journalist known for her investigative pieces, listened intently as Daniel recounted the events leading up to the blackmail scheme. Her eyes widened with disbelief and outrage as she absorbed the details. "This isn't just about you," she said firmly. "This is about exposing a corrupt system." Elena encouraged Daniel to go public with his story, emphasizing that staying silent would only empower people like Mark to continue abusing their authority. With Elena's guidance, Daniel began organizing the mountain of evidence he'd gathered. Text messages revealed Mark's escalating threats, while recordings captured his thinly veiled attempts at extortion. Photos of the fabricated drug evidence served as irrefutable proof of Mark's deceit. Together, Daniel and Elena pieced together a timeline that painted a damning picture of corruption and racial bias within the police department. They knew going public wouldn't be easy. It would invite scrutiny, criticism, and possibly retaliation. But both were determined to see justice served no matter the cost. As preparations continued, Daniel wrestled with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt empowered knowing he was taking a stand against wrongdoing. On the other, he couldn't shake the anxiety of confronting such a powerful adversary. Thoughts of how this might affect his relationship with Police Chief Laura Hargrove weighed heavily on his mind. Would she believe him? Would she see him as complicit in tarnishing the department's reputation? These questions haunted him, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Meanwhile, Mark remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. To him, Daniel was just another pawn in his twisted game, a means to an end. He continued making demands, oblivious to the fact that each interaction brought him closer to ruin. His arrogance blinded him to the possibility that his victim might fight back, let alone gather enough evidence to dismantle his entire operation. Unbeknownst to Mark, Daniel and Elena were preparing to deliver a knockout blow. With the help of internal affairs, they submitted all the evidence they'd collected, presenting a comprehensive dossier that left no room for doubt. Phone logs, transcripts, and recordings told a chilling story of abuse, coercion, and racism. By the time the EDE investigation was underway, Mark still believed he held all the cards. What he didn't realize was that the tables had turned, and when the truth finally came to light, it would change everything. For Daniel, this journey was far from over. The weight of exposing corruption carried its own set of challenges, but he knew he was doing the right thing, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever fallen victim to unchecked power. As he prepared to step forward and share his story with the world, he felt a glimmer of hope. Hope that justice could prevail, that accountability could replace impunity, and that perhaps his courage would inspire others to speak out too. The investigation into Officer Mark Reynolds' misconduct began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first crack in a dam that would eventually unleash a torrent of consequences. What started as whispers among colleagues soon grew into full-blown, rumors rippling through the police department and beyond. Officers who had long suspected Mark's questionable behavior now exchanged knowing glances and hushed conversations in hallways and break rooms. The air was thick with tension, a mix of curiosity, fear, and disbelief. How could someone so entrenched in the system fall so spectacularly from grace? And what did this mean for the department as a whole? For Police Chief Laura Hargrove, the situation was nothing short of a nightmare. As the head of the department, she prided herself on maintaining order, integrity, and trust within her ranks. But now, her authority and her personal life were under intense scrutiny. Rumors about her relationship with Daniel Carter had always been a point of gossip, but they had never spilled into the public sphere until now. The revelation that one of her own officers had targeted Daniel not only tarnished the department's reputation but also forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the people she worked alongside every day. At first, Laura tried to keep her emotions in check, adopting a stoic demeanor as she navigated the unfolding crisis. But behind closed doors, she wrestled with conflicting feelings. On one hand, she felt betrayed by Mark, a man she had trusted to uphold the law and protect the community. On the other, she couldn't ignore the sting of embarrassment over her private life becoming fodder for speculation. Despite these challenges, Laura knew she had a responsibility to act decisively. She called an emergency meeting with internal affairs, vowing transparency and accountability no matter where the investigation led. As news of the allegations spread, the town buzzed with chatter. Social media lit up with posts dissecting every detail of the scandal, while local news outlets scrambled to piece together the story. Some residents expressed outrage at Mark's actions, calling for immediate consequences. Others, however, were quick to criticize Daniel, questioning why he hadn't come forward sooner or why he was involved with the police chief in the first place. These mixed reactions highlighted the complexities of human nature, the tendency to assign blame even when the lines between right and wrong weren't clear-cut. Within the department, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Officers who once joked with Mark now avoided him altogether, unsure how to navigate the sudden reversal of fortunes. Those who had looked up to him as a seasoned veteran grappled with disillusionment, while others breathed sighs of relief that his toxic behavior might finally be addressed. Meanwhile, whispers about systemic issues within the department began surfacing. Was Mark an isolated case, or was he symptomatic of deeper problems? Questions like these hung heavy in the air, prompting soul-searching among those sworn to serve. and protect. For Daniel, the weeks following his decision to expose Mark were emotionally taxing. While he felt a sense of vindication knowing he was fighting back against injustice, the weight of public attention took its toll. Friends and acquaintances reached out, some offering support, others casting judgment. Strangers stopped him in grocery stores and coffee shops, eager to share their opinions about the case. Some praised his courage, while others accused him of seeking revenge or publicity. It was exhausting, but Daniel reminded himself why he had chosen this path: to hold someone accountable for their actions and to shine a light on abuses of power. Despite the chaos swirling around him, Daniel refused to back down. With Elena's help, he prepared for the inevitable fallout, rehearsing answers to potential questions and steeling himself for criticism. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he drew strength from the knowledge that he wasn't alone. Elena stood firmly by his side, using her journalistic expertise to ensure the story reached the widest possible audience. Together, they crafted a narrative that focused not just on Mark's actions but on the broader implications of unchecked corruption within institutions meant to safeguard justice. As the investigation progressed, internal affairs uncovered damning evidence that left little room for doubt. Audio recordings revealed Mark's attempts to extort Daniel, complete with racial slurs and thinly veiled threats. Text messages painted a picture of escalating coercion, while fabricated evidence from the traffic stop exposed the depths of Mark's deceit. Each new discovery sent shockwaves through the department, forcing colleagues to confront uncomfortable realities about the man they thought they knew. Mark, meanwhile, remained defiant. When confronted by investigators, he initially denied all accusations, dismissing them as baseless attacks orchestrated by Daniel and Elena. He accused Daniel of trying to ruin his career out of spite, spinning a narrative designed to deflect blame. But as the mountain of evidence grew, his denials rang hollow. Investigators presented him with irrefutable proof of his misconduct, leaving him scrambling to find excuses. His arrogance, once a defining trait, now worked against him, making him appear reckless and unrepentant. By the time the investigation concluded, the case had become impossible to ignore. The findings were laid bare in a formal report detailing Mark's abuse of power, racial bias, and attempts at extortion. The document painted a chilling portrait of a man who believed himself above the law, willing to exploit his position for personal gain. For Chief Hargrove, reading the report was both heartbreaking and infuriating. She had always strived to lead by example, fostering a culture of professionalism and ethics within her department. Now, she faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust, not just among her officers but also within the community. In a press conference held shortly after the investigation wrapped up, Laura addressed the public with unwavering determination. Standing before cameras and reporters, she acknowledged the mistakes made under her watch and pledged to implement sweeping reforms. "This is a dark chapter for our department," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "But it is also an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to ensure something like this never happens again." Her words resonated with many, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the turmoil. For Daniel, watching Laura take ownership of the situation was bittersweet. He admired her willingness to face the truth head-on, yet he couldn't help but wonder if things might have turned out differently had she acted sooner. Still, he appreciated her commitment to change, recognizing it as a step toward healing and accountability. As the dust settled and the initial wave of outrage subsided, Daniel allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He had set out to expose one corrupt officer, but in doing so, he had sparked a conversation about fairness, integrity, and the need for vigilance in holding those in power accountable. Though the journey had been grueling, Daniel found solace in the fact that he had made a difference. The case against Mark wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about sending a message that no one, regardless of rank or position, was above the law. And as the town slowly began to move forward, Daniel knew this was only the beginning of a larger fight for justice, equality, and transparency. The day finally arrived when the truth could no longer be hidden, and Officer Mark Reynolds stood face to face with the consequences of his actions. The evidence against him was overwhelming. A mountain of recordings, text messages, and fabricated documents that left no room for denial. Yet as internal affairs investigators presented their findings, Mark clung to his defense like a drowning man grasping at straws. He insisted he'd been misunderstood, claiming his words were taken out of context and accusing Daniel Carter of orchestrating a personal vendetta. But this time, his excuses fell flat. There was simply too much proof, too many witnesses, and too clear a pattern of misconduct for anyone to believe him. For Chief Laura Hargrove, the moment of reckoning came during a closed-door hearing where disciplinary action was discussed. Sitting across from her superiors and representatives from internal affairs, she listened intently as they laid out the case against Mark. His attempts at extortion, racial profiling, and abuse of power were outlined in excruciating detail. Every accusation felt like a punch to the gut, not because she doubted their validity, but because it forced her to confront how deeply flawed her department had become under her watch. She had always prided herself on leading with integrity, yet here she was presiding over one of the most egregious scandals in recent memory. When it came time for her to speak, Laura didn't mince words. "This is not just about one bad officer," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "It's about addressing the cracks in our system that allowed this behavior to fester unchecked. We owe it to the community and to ourselves to do better." Her statement struck a chord, not only with those present but also with officers who later heard about the meeting. It signaled a turning point. Accountability would no longer be optional. Within days, the decision was made official. Mark Reynolds was stripped of his badge and terminated from the police force without ceremony or fanfare. For someone who had once strutted through the halls of the precinct with an air of invincibility, the fall from grace was swift and humiliating. Stripped of his authority, Mark found himself isolated, shunned by former colleagues who wanted nothing to do with him. Some whispered that karma had finally caught up with him. Others simply avoided eye contact altogether. But justice didn't stop there. With the full weight of the law bearing down on him, Mark was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including extortion, racial profiling, and fabricating evidence. Each charge carried significant penalties, ensuring that even if he managed to avoid prison time, his career and reputation were irreparably damaged. As news of his arrest spread, reactions varied widely. Some residents celebrated openly, relieved that a corrupt officer had been brought to justice. Others expressed cautious optimism, wondering whether this marked the start of real change within the department. Meanwhile, Daniel Carter found himself thrust into the spotlight in ways he hadn't anticipated. Once a private individual content to live quietly, he now became a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. Journalists clamored for interviews, activists invited him to speak at rallies, and strangers approached him on the street to thank him for his bravery. While some of the attention was flattering, much of it was overwhelming. People expected him to have all the answers, to know exactly how to fix the broken systems he had exposed. But Daniel knew better than anyone that solutions weren't simple or quick. Despite the pressure, Daniel remained steadfast in his mission. He used his newfound platform to advocate for victims of police misconduct, sharing his story at town hall meetings, and community forums. His message was consistent. Accountability starts with speaking up. "I'm not special," he often said. "I'm just someone who decided enough was enough. If we want things to change, we all have to be willing to take a stand." His words resonated deeply, inspiring others to share their own experiences and demand reform. Elena Martinez, the journalist who had helped Daniel compile evidence, played a crucial role in amplifying his voice. Through a series of investigative articles, she shed light on the broader issues plaguing law enforcement, not just in their small town but nationwide. Her pieces highlighted cases of racial bias, corruption, and abuse of power, drawing connections between individual incidents and systemic failures. Readers responded with outrage and calls for action, prompting local leaders to take notice. For the first time in years, meaningful conversations about policing reform began taking shape. Back at the police department, Chief Hargrove worked tirelessly to implement changes aimed at preventing another scandal like this from happening again. She introduced mandatory training programs focused on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity, ensuring every officer understood the importance of treating everyone fairly. She also established a civilian oversight board to review complaints against officers, providing an additional layer of accountability. These measures weren't perfect, and some critics argued they didn't go far enough, but they represented a step in the right direction. Not everyone welcomed these reforms with open arms. Some veteran officers grumbled about political correctness and accused Laura of pandering to public opinion. Others worried that increased scrutiny would make it harder for them to do their jobs effectively. Laura acknowledged their concerns but refused to back down. "Change is uncomfortable," she told her team during a department-wide meeting. "But staying the same isn't an option. If we want to earn back the trust of this community, we need to show them we're serious about doing better." As weeks turned into months, the town slowly began to heal. Conversations that had once been taboo about race, privilege, and accountability became part of everyday discourse. Residents attended workshops and panel discussions, eager to learn more about how they could contribute to creating a fairer society. Schools incorporated lessons on civic responsibility and social justice into their curriculums, planting seeds of awareness in the next generation. Even local businesses got involved, sponsoring events and initiatives designed to promote unity and understanding. For Daniel, seeing these changes unfold was both gratifying and humbling. He never imagined his decision to fight back against Mark would spark such widespread transformation. But he also knew the work wasn't finished. Rebuilding trust took time, and progress often came in fits and starts. Still, he held on to hope, believing that every small victory mattered. Whether it was a teenager inspired to pursue activism or a neighbor deciding to speak up about injustice, each act of courage contributed to the larger goal of creating a better future. As for Mark Reynolds, his legacy served as a cautionary tale. Once a figure of authority and respect, he became a symbol of what happens when power goes unchecked. His name was rarely mentioned without a shake of the head or a muttered comment about how arrogance blinds people to their own flaws. In court, he pleaded guilty to several charges in exchange for reduced sentences, sparing himself the spectacle of a trial. Though he avoided prison, the damage to his life was irreversible. Friends distanced themselves, opportunities vanished, and his once promising career ended in disgrace. In the end, the case of the racist cop fired for handcuffing and blackmailing the police chief's lover wasn't just about one man's downfall. It was about exposing the cracks in a system designed to protect, but too often failed those it served. It was about holding individuals accountable while recognizing the need for collective action. And perhaps most importantly, it was about proving that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, courage and determination could lead to change. In the months following Mark Reynolds' downfall, the town began to feel different. Not drastically so, but in subtle ways that hinted at progress. Conversations that once tiptoed around sensitive topics like race and accountability now flowed more freely, as if a long-standing barrier had been broken. People who had previously stayed silent found their voices, sharing stories of their own encounters with injustice or calling out behaviors they'd witnessed but never questioned. The scandal had forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths, and though the process was messy and imperfect, it planted seeds of reflection and growth. For Daniel Carter, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it wasn't the same normal he'd known before. His quiet evenings at home were occasionally interrupted by calls from reporters seeking updates or invitations to speak at events across the state. Some days, he welcomed the opportunity to share his story. Other days, he craved solitude, exhausted by the weight of being a public figure. Still, he couldn't deny the impact his actions had made. Strangers approached him in grocery stores, thanking him for standing up to corruption. Parents told him they used his story to teach their children about courage and integrity. These moments reminded him why he had chosen this path, even when it felt daunting. But Daniel's journey wasn't without its challenges. The spotlight brought both praise and criticism, And not everyone viewed him as a hero. Some accused him of seeking attention, while others dismissed his efforts as insufficient to address deeper systemic issues. A few vocal critics even suggested his relationship with Chief Laura Hargrove gave him an unfair advantage, implying he might have orchestrated the entire ordeal for personal gain. Though these accusations stung, Daniel refused to let them derail him. He understood that change rarely came without resistance, and he focused instead on what truly mattered, ensuring that no one else would suffer the way he had. Chief Hargrove, too, faced her share of scrutiny. While many applauded her swift response to the scandal, others questioned whether she could have prevented it altogether. Critics pointed to her leadership style, accusing her of turning a blind eye to warning signs about officers like Mark Reynolds. Rumors swirled about her personal life, with some suggesting her relationship with Daniel compromised her ability to remain impartial. For a time, it seemed the pressure might overwhelm her. Yet, Laura persevered, channeling the backlash into motivation to prove her critics wrong. She threw herself into implementing reforms, working closely with the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board to review policies and procedures. She organized monthly meetings with community members, creating spaces where residents could voice concerns and offer suggestions. At first, turnout was sparse, with only a handful of people attending. But as word spread that Laura genuinely listened and acted on the feedback she received, participation grew. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, brick by brick. One of the most significant changes came in the form of transparency initiatives. Under Laura's leadership, the department started publishing quarterly reports detailing officer conduct, complaints filed, and disciplinary actions taken. Officers were required to wear body cameras during all interactions with the public, and footage was made available upon request, within legal limits. These measures weren't universally popular. Some officers grumbled about feeling micromanaged, but they signaled a commitment to openness that resonated with the community. Meanwhile, Elena Martinez continued her work as a journalist, expanding her focus beyond local issues to examine national trends in policing reform. Her articles gained widespread recognition, earning awards and sparking debates in editorial pages across the country page. Through her writing, she highlighted success stories from towns like theirs, showing that change, however incremental, was possible. She also kept tabs on the aftermath of Mark's case, ensuring the public remained informed about updates and developments. When Mark's sentencing hearing took place, a modest event attended mostly by lawyers and reporters, Elena covered it meticulously, reminding readers of the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions. As for Mark himself, his life after the scandal was a shadow of what it once was. Living in a modest apartment far from the neighborhood he'd once patrolled, he spent his days working odd jobs to make ends meet. Friends and acquaintances avoided him, and family gatherings became awkward affairs where his presence was barely acknowledged. Occasionally, he considered reaching out to apologize, to Daniel, to Laura, to anyone affected by his actions, but shame and pride held him back. Instead, he retreated further into isolation, haunted by memories of a career he had ruined through arrogance and prejudice. Despite the lingering scars, the town emerged stronger in many ways. Schools introduced programs focused on diversity and inclusion, encouraging students to embrace differences rather than fear them. Local businesses partnered with nonprofits to fund scholarships for underrepresented youth, fostering opportunities for future leaders. Even the police department saw positive shifts, as younger officers inspired by Laura's reforms brought fresh perspectives and renewed dedication to serving the community fairly. Daniel eventually decided to step back from the limelight, choosing to focus on rebuilding his personal life. He reconnected with old hobbies, spent more time outdoors, and leaned on close friends for support. Though he remained passionate about advocating for justice, he recognized the importance of balance. "I can't fix everything," he admitted during a rare interview, "but I can keep doing my part, one step at a time." Laura, too, found solace in small victories. Watching officers embrace new training programs or seeing residents engage in productive dialogue filled her with hope. She knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but she believed the foundation laid during this tumultuous period would endure. "We're not perfect," she said at a town hall meeting, "but we're trying, and that's something worth celebrating." In the end, the story of Mark Reynolds and Daniel Carter became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a testament to resilience, accountability, and the power of collective action. It showed that while systems may falter and individuals may fail, there is always room for redemption and renewal. As the town moved forward, its residents carried with them lessons learned and promises made, determined to build a future defined not by fear or division, but by courage and unity.